Chapter 2. There's no place like home. What on earth have you done to your leg, Budi? Mum is always worrying. Worrying about Grandma, worrying about money, worrying about me. I'm always telling her that she shouldn't worry so much because it's bad for her health, but then she just worries about worrying. She gets especially worried whenever I cut myself because I've got this condition where you don't stop bleeding. There's something wrong with my blood, which means it doesn't clot properly. Ustan says it's because my family don't pray or fast like proper Muslims. So Allah has cursed us. My grandpa had it, and my dad and his twin brother have it too, so it's kind of like a family curse. But we don't talk about my uncle, not since he took a one-way trip to Execution Island. What Ustan doesn't realize is that having a bleeding problem makes you the best at dodging tackles, so it's actually a blessing. It's okay, I say. It's just a graze. But there's blood everywhere. I look down and realize it looks a lot worse since I ran home. The blood has trickled round my shin, and there are spots of it all over my boots. How did it happen? I got attacked by a tiger. Oh, really? She crosses her arms, creasing the orange fabric of her shirt. And what was a tiger doing in the middle of Jakarta? It must have swum all the way here from Sumatra. Roshi says that Sumatran tigers are really good swimmers because they've got webbed paws. Is that right? Mum asks. It must have been hungry to swim all that way. Very hungry. So why did it take such a small bite? It ate Ustan first. Mum laughs. And I smile because all the worry disappears from her face. But then she looks very serious. I hope Ustan isn't responsible for what happened to your leg. I hope you boys are playing nicely. Doesn't Roshi look after you? That's the trouble with being small for your age. Everyone thinks you need a bodyguard, especially when you have a bleeding problem. I don't need looking after, Mum. I'm almost 12. Anyway, you should have seen the goal I scored. She ruffles my hair. You can tell me all about it over dinner, but first you need to clean up your leg before Dad gets home. Wait on the step and I'll bring you a cloth and some water. Sitting in the doorway with my legs stretched out into the street, I pick up the crusty blood on the front of my shin. I dig out a small chunk of glass from the skin beneath my knee and flick it across the road. It lands among some rubbish in the doorway of the crumbling apartment opposite. The block has been on the verge of collapsing for as long as I can remember. The walls have wide cracks sprouting from the floor, and the whole thing seems to lean towards the building next to it. Dad says they used the wrong type of concrete, and the government has banned everyone from living there. But the dragon still rents it out. Mum brings the cloth and water and puts them down next to me. The printed flowers on the hem of her cane swish around the ground, and she makes the dust smell like flowers too. Make sure you wash all the grit out. If it gets infected, I don't know how we'll pay for medication. Mum goes back into the apartment, and I start washing the spots of blood from my boots, because I don't want them to get stained. Mum and Dad bought them for me for my birthday last year, and I've finally grown into them. They're fakes, obviously, but they're good fakes. Real fakes. I know they must have been expensive, and the last thing I want to have is to have blood-stained football boots. You never see a professional footballer in blood-stained boots, do you? After I've finished cleaning my boots, I start scrubbing at my shin. The blood comes off pretty easily, and by the time Dad arrives, I've washed all the little bits of grit out of the cut. Dad works in a factory that makes smart shirts for businessmen, and even though he doesn't have to, he always wears a short-sleeved shirt with a collar to work, either his white one or the one with yellow and blue checks. He says it's important to be proud of yourself. He's always telling me, Budi, if you don't respect yourself, nobody will. You must be proud of who you are. Today, he's wearing the shirt with the yellow and blue checks, and it sticks to a sweaty patch on his chest. As he gets closer, he smiles and sits down on the step beside me. "What's happened here then?" he asks, kissing me on the head. "I cut my leg playing football." Dad leans over and grimaces as I show him my knee. The cut glistens with fresh blood. "Make sure you get all the grit out. We don't want it to get infected." I nod and keep brushing it with the cloth. "Was it foul?" Dad asks. "No, but I scored an amazing goal, so it was worth it." "Good boy. If you keep it up, you'll play for Madrid one day." "Real Madrid, Dad. If you just say Madrid, it could mean Atletico Madrid, and I would rather never play football again than play for them." I know. I meant Real Madrid. Just keep practicing and you'll get there." I smile and Dad pats me on the back. It's already dark, but the air is still very warm. Dad looks up at the small patches of sky among the laundry. "It's going to rain soon," he says. "The monsoon must be on its way. Can you feel it?" "Yeah," I say. But at the moment, it's hard to imagine the bone-dry streets thick with mud, rainwater dripping from the empty washing lines, and people splashing through puddles with newspapers held above their heads. Sometimes it feels like the dry season will never end, that the days will just get hotter and hotter forever. But it's got to rain soon. The air has become sticky and heavy, waiting for it. But tonight there are no clouds, just a black, starless sky, so the weather won't break yet. The sound of people chattering over dinner reaches us from the apartments above. Every so often, a scooter blares past, kicking up dust that turns red in the glow of the brake lights. A fresh trickle of blood dribbles down my shin. "Here," Dad says, taking a handkerchief from his pocket and twisting it. "Hold this against your knee while I knot it." He ties the bandage tight. "How's that?" "Much better." My stomach rumbles and he smiles. "Come on, let's go and see if dinner's ready." Mum is just spooning the rice onto steel trays when we walk in, and I help her carry them from the kitchen in one corner to the table in the other. Grandma is already waiting with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Hello, Grandma," I say. "Aren't you going to be hot in that blanket? You know Mum's made spicy rendang tonight." Mum hasn't really made spicy rendang because today is Wednesday. On Wednesdays, we just have rice. Wednesdays are better than Fridays because we don't have anything on Fridays. But I like to imagine there's a feast on the rickety little table and Grandma plays along. Tonight it's a tray of Mum's world-famous rendang. "I'm just fine, thank you," Grandma says. "An old woman like me needs to keep warm, and I haven't tasted a rendang that's been too spicy for me yet." When Grandma smiles, her wrinkly face creases even more, and her eyes become narrow slits. Grandma isn't like other old ladies, because most of them get really thin and bony the older they get, but Grandma still has plump, round cheeks. She puts this down to maintaining a healthy appetite, which is almost as important as being proud of who you are and pursuing your dreams. Grandma is full of useful advice and interesting stories. Once, a snake bit her on the arm, and she sucked the venom out. Now she's immune to venom. Another time, she fell from a third-story window but landed in a passing cart carrying silks and soft fabrics. It's because of this and the fact that she is the oldest person I know that I'm beginning to think Grandma might be indestructible. "Your mother was just telling me that you cut your leg today. I hope you washed it properly." "Yes, Grandma, I got all the grit out." "And I suppose I'd never be able to guess how you hurt yourself?" "Playing football." "Football, always football. Football will be the death of you, young man." Grandma smiles at me, and for a moment I think she is going to come clean about being indestructible, but then she looks down at her tray and takes a big mouthful of rice. I know she's joking about football being the death of me because being a footballer is probably the safest job in the world. When a footballer gets injured, there are about 6 doctors around him in a second, even if he's just pretending. Once I waited almost 6 hours to see a doctor at the hospital when Mum thought I was bleeding on the inside, and even then I didn't get put on a stretcher and carried about like a prince. Bleeding on the inside is the worst. Most people think having a bleeding problem means you're going to bleed to death from the tiniest cut, but the real problem is bleeding on the inside. At any moment, I might start bleeding and not know until I fall over and die. You can't see it, you can't taste it. Some people can't even feel it, but I think I can. It's that feeling like when you've done something bad and Grandma or Roshi find out and there's a knife in you somewhere near your heart. And with every word they say, it turns a little further, pushing in a little deeper, bleeding on the inside. That is definitely the worst. Mum turns to Dad and says, "How was work today, Elvis?" That's another thing about Grandma. She gave Dad a crazy name. Elvis Presley was an American singer and movie star about 60 years ago, and Grandma was madly in love with him until he died on the toilet. But I suppose it's hard to love someone after that. But while he was still alive, Dad was born, and Grandma called him Elvis. I'm not sure how Grandpa felt about the whole situation. I would ask him, but I can't because he died in a big earthquake that happened when I was little. Mum says I slept through the whole thing. It suddenly hits me that I don't know what Grandma called my uncle. If she had twins and named one of them Elvis, what did she call the other one? Presley. Without thinking, I interrupt Dad, telling us about his day, and ask Grandma, "Grandma, what name did you give to Uncle?" I should have remembered the silence from the last time I mentioned Uncle in front of my family. I should have remembered the stern look on Grandma's face, the coolness in her eyes, that feeling like her hand is gripping the knife on the inside. Slowly, she turns her face to look at me. "Budi," she says, "you don't have an uncle, not anymore." I swallow, even though there's nothing in my mouth. "Yes, Grandma," I mutter, but I still don't understand. I mean, obviously, they call Nusa Kambangan Execution Island for a reason. I know what happens there. I know no one comes back. I know when you do something wrong, something bad, they take you there and lock you up in a tiny cell for years and years until you're sure everyone has forgotten about you. And then one night, while you're asleep on your flea-ridden bed, they drag you out to a quiet place, kicking and screaming and confused, and they give you a choice, kneeling or standing. And then they shoot you. No matter how much you beg and cry and plead, no matter how blurry your vision gets or how much your nose runs, they aim their rifles at your heart and they shoot you. I know all that. I have nightmares about it. But what I don't know is whether Uncle has been there long enough yet, and my family aren't going to tell me. I stare into my tray and chew a mouthful of rice for as long as it takes for someone to break the silence. "Sorry," Mum says, talking to Dad, but looking at me. "You were telling us about your day, Elvis." "Why, you know how frustrating it is," Dad says. "I asked Supardi when we'll be getting last month's wages, and he said it should be any day now, but I know he's too scared to confront the boss about it. I don't blame him. He knows if he makes a fuss, it'll probably delay the payment even more. He might even lose his job if he upsets the wrong people. But it's annoying, especially because I'm still waiting for overtime from the month before that." Mum reaches across to Dad and strokes his arm. "It'll be a lot easier when the minimum wage goes up," she says. "If it ever goes up," says Grandma. "Oh, they talk about these things all the time, but nothing seems to happen. And those people protesting in the streets will only make things worse, no matter what they say." Dad takes a deep breath, and his face breaks into a smile. "Come now, Ibu. Change is coming. Things will get easier. Besides, we'll be rich when Budi plays for Real Madrid." Dad winks at me, and Grandma shakes her head, muttering something about football. "Tell us about the goal you scored today, Budi," Mum says. I'll have to stand up to explain it properly. Don't get indigestion, Mum says. I won't. I do them an action replay. I show them how Roshi chipped the ball to me, how I took it down on my chest, dodged Widodo's tackle, dummied the shot, stepped inside Uston and scored past Fakri. It's hard to do the goal justice in such a small space, but my family clap as I run around the table celebrating. I have to stop to squeeze between Dad's chair and the wall, but when I get through, I put my fingers and thumbs together to make the shape of a heart and pat my chest where the Real Madrid badge should be. I wish I could have seen it, Grandma says, smiling. When I'm a professional, I'll buy you a television so you can watch me play without leaving your armchair. They all laugh, but suddenly Grandma starts coughing horribly. It sounds like rocks are being grated inside her throat, and bits of rice fly from her mouth. Mum gets up and pats her on the back, but Grandma holds up a hand to make her stop. I try to ignore Grandma's coughing fit by scraping the last of my rice into a pile. I hate looking at Grandma when she's coughing. Her eyes become all bloodshot and tears roll over her cheeks. It's like she becomes a different person, someone who is not indestructible. But after a minute or two, she always recovers and tries to pretend nothing has happened, even though her eyes are red and watery, and the squidgely vein on her forehead bulges beneath her skin. I'll watch every match you play in, she says, as Mum lifts a cup of water to her lips. We finish dinner, and I help Mum clear the trays away. Dad gives Grandma her arm so she can get back to her armchair. I don't like watching Grandma on the move because she always looks so weak. When she is sitting in her big cozy armchair with a blanket across her lap, smiling at everything and telling stories about her youth, she doesn't seem that old. But when she shuffles across the room with her back hunched over, she starts to look like the old beggar woman who roamed the streets. It's only a couple of meters from the table to her chair, but she makes it seem like a marathon. That's why I'm always so keen to help with the washing up after dinner. By the time I turn round again, Grandma is tucked up in her chair. Will you tell me a story, Grandma, before I go to bed? Of course. Come and sit on the rug and I'll tell you about the time I found a tiger in the yard. No, Grandma, tell me a story that I haven't heard before. Okay, let me see. Have I told you about the time it rained so hard the roof collapsed? Yes. How about the man I knew with 6 fingers and 6 toes? Yes. She scratches her neck and puts a finger to her lips. Mum and Dad sit at the table watching Grandma with smiling eyes. How about the boy I knew who wanted to be an actor? No, you never told me that one before. What happened? Well, when I was a girl, I knew a boy who wanted desperately to be an actor. He was a few years older than me, very good looking, and all he could think about was acting. When you talked to him, you would think nothing else existed. He said he wanted to be a famous actor in the Hollywood movies. Everyone laughed at him, of course, because he worked in his father's paddy fields, didn't even speak any English, and no one in the village had ever left the island, let alone been to America. But he didn't let that bother him. He used to save every rupiah he could, and when he had enough, he would take the bus to the nearest town with a cinema and watch whatever was showing. He would come back full of energy and renewed ambition, determined to become a star. He could remember lines from the films and would act them out if you asked him politely. I must say he was very good. Then he would begin saving his money to do it all over again. Grandma clasps her hands together and rests them on her lap. While she talks, I wind the tassels of the edge of the rug around my fingers. Apparently, the rug was given to Grandma as a wedding gift, so it must be ancient. The patch in the front of her chair is threadbare and not as soft as the rest, but it's still my favorite place to sit. And then what happened, I asked. Well, One morning, the boy's father went out into the fields to check the oxen had been rigged up to the plough for the day's work, but his son was nowhere to be seen. At first, everyone thought he had taken an early bus to watch a film, and the farmer was furious at his son's negligence. But he still hadn't returned by mid-afternoon. When nightfall came, the farmer remained adamant that his son would be back soon. He thought the boy was hiding nearby, planning to sneak back home after everyone had gone to bed to avoid being eaten. Not eaten, beaten. But night came and went, and gradually we came to realize he wasn't coming back. Grandma stops to smooth the blanket across her lap. She always pauses at the worst moments. And then what happened? The village never heard of him again, at least as far as I know, because I moved away a few years later. Everyone assumed he had been kidnapped. People went missing all the time back then, more so than today. But then one day, it must have been about 20 years after he went missing, I was on a bus and I went past one of those big billboards just outside the city that was advertising a new American film. I couldn't be certain because I only saw it for a few seconds before we drove by, but one of the actors looked just like an older version of the boy I knew. Well, I thought that settles it. He did make it after all. I just hope he went back to visit his poor father once in a while. Are you sure it was him, Grandma? Quite sure, she says, adjusting herself in her armchair. I never forget a face. What was his name? Don't ask me that. I might not forget a face, but I can certainly forget a name. Now I can feel my eyelids drooping, and you've got an early start in the morning, so off you go to bed. I get up and kiss Grandma on the cheek. Despite how wrinkled her face is, her skin is really soft. You'd better let your mother take a look at that cut, Grandma says, glancing down at the bloody bandage around my knee. Mum gets up from the table and unties the handkerchief. It's soaked and hangs like a dead animal in her hand. It still looks fresh, she says. Elvis, can you pass me the coconut butter? Dad retrieves a tin from the kitchen cupboard and passes it to Mum. She scoops out a dollop of butter and smears it across the cut with her fingertips. The coolness of it makes my knee twitch, and it's almost worth getting injured just for the sweet, delicious smell. Sometimes, when no one is looking, I eat the butter straight out of the tin to heal any cuts on the inside. There, she says, standing up and giving me a hug. That should do the trick. We'll see you in the morning, superstar, Dad says, ruffling my hair. Sleep well, son. I go to my room and get undressed. The light bulb has gone, so I have to do it in the dark, but it isn't difficult to find my mattress because it takes up most of the room. When I'm in bed, I listen to the hum of different generators until one by one they're switched off and I fall asleep to the distant sounds of the city.